Good morning, merhaba, bonjour. Thank you very much, shukran, merci to be here. I have to choose a language. I come from Paris, but I will choose English. My Arabic will be for next time. Okay. Women in War is a think tank on gender and armed conflict based in Paris with a branch in Sarajevo, which brings researchers together through various projects. It's the academic branch of a humanitarian association I started years ago called Femmes, which works with women's grassroots associations and groups in war zones. Last year we decided to commemorate the place of women in World War I by annual conferences in conflict zones. So from 2014 to 2018, you'll be hearing from us. The aim is to discuss the place of women in armed conflicts today with academics and activists coming together. Usually these are separate worlds and they don't usually communicate, and this may contribute to the incoherence, as you know, of peace projects everywhere and part of the mess we're in today. Last year we started in Sarajevo, naturally, this being, 1914, etc. And immediately afterwards we thought of Beirut. Where else? Next year? Well, we'll tell you at the end. I wish to thank my dear friend Evelyne Accad for having brought me to Beirut and introduced me to the eminent institute, USO, I think that's the way you pronounce it. I pronounce ISO, but it's probably in Arabic, USO, at LAU, which many of you are discovering, and just as many, probably more, already known. Evelyne immediately decided to support the project with Jacqueline, who's also here, merci Jacqueline, and Beit Hanane. Evelyne and I are both humanitarian activists, humanitarian academics, or academic humanitarian, both probably, so that's why we work together. I want to thank very especially Samira, Miriam, and my namesake Carol, who's been sick but has resuscitated for today. She's very brave. And I want to thank them for having so generously accepted to take on this complex and ambitious project. I am grateful to them because we've been able to work in such a harmonious and coordinated manner. Thank you. The Institute, as you know, are the world's great experts on the Arab world. We in Women in War, very modestly, wanted to extend the debates by bringing fields that we cover more specifically in webinars and other things. So this is why you'll be hearing from the Caucasus, from Azerbaijan, Afghanistan, the Balkans, West Africa, and even France. So we're going a lot further, or we're trying anyway. Nevertheless, however, we must remember that we are living through very grim times. In the luxurious hotel in which the Institute has so painstakingly and wonderfully organized this great event, we must remember what this great country is going through at the very moment. The hordes of Syrian refugee beggars that you will see in the streets outside, the presence of Sabra and Shatila, like 10 minutes away, remind us that we as academics and activists have our duty to change what is going on. This is our responsibility. And especially in this war against women that we are experiencing across this and other parts of the world. The road to peace should be in our hands as academics and activists, and I hope our debates help us get closer to some avenues of peace and resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. It's really very emotional for me to see you all here because in 2010 we were in Cairo celebrating Nawal El-Saadawi. It was the beginning of the so-called Arab Springs, and we thought we were going to be changing the world and the area, and this is where we are now at. So we are very thankful that Nawal El-Saadawi has come and has been so courageous, and all of you also have come to this conference. I'm going to also be brief and just tell you how the project started. Carol Mann has already, thank you so much, told you a little bit how it started, and I was going to say also that it's so important to be mixing academia with activism, and this has been becoming more and more important in my life. It already was before. And so when Carol Mann approached me in Paris and told me about her desire to do this, and I already had admiration for her because she's someone very courageous who goes to the war zones and works there. She opened a school for women courageously in Afghanistan all by herself and has been done a lot of things like this in Africa and other places. So I welcomed the project very much, and since I had been associated with the Women's Institute for years, even from its beginning about 40 years ago, I was in touch with Jolinda Abu Nasr, Rose Ghraib, and have been very active with the Women's Institute throughout all these years. You can imagine how old this makes me. I was extremely happy to contact my friends there, Samira Agassi, Miriam Sfer, whom I have known, and I told them about the project, which they welcomed. And so it became a joint project. And since we are also activists, and my sister, who's here, Jacqueline Hajjar, who's probably one of the most activists among us in many ways, who opened courageously in this area a shelter for women. She had been doing this in her own home. And then 5 years ago, she decided she should open a safe space for women in that area. And I helped her to get this project going. So Beit el-Hanane joined us, Beit el-Hanane, Home of Tenderness, and there's going to be a play on Tuesday that you are welcome to attend. I have the announcements for those of you who haven't seen it yet on Tuesday evening if you want to meet women at the shelter. Anyway, to be brief now, I'd just like to say that in these very difficult moments that we are passing through, the whole region being in such upheaval and war and more violence, and where women and children and old people are paying such a high price, it is so good that to see that we want to make some change. How are we going to be able to make this change? I hope that by the end of the conference, we will have some ideas on what we can do. Thank you.
سأتكلم بالعربية. ليس تعصبا للغة، فأنا لا أتعصب للغة أو قومية أو دين أو حتى الجنس، لأن لا يكفي أن يكون الإنسان امرأة. هناك نساء عندهم عقلية طبقية أبوية عنصرية حربية، وفي نساء دخلوا الحرب وقتلوا. فليس لأن اللغة العربية أحسن لغة، ولكن لأننا في بلد عربي، ولأننا اضطهدنا باللغة الإنجليزية، استعمرنا باللغة الإنجليزية. فعلى الأقل، وهي أيضا لغة الأم، لغة أمي ولغة طفولتي، وأنا أكتب باللغة العربية. ولكن بكل أسف أنا يعني كتبت الكلمة بتاعتي باللغة الإنجليزية، لأننا تصورت إنه يعني ما فهمتش إن أنا ممكن أكتب باللغة. أنا تصورته مؤتمر دولي اللغة الإنجليزية هي الموجودة، لكن أنا بقدر الإمكان، لأن في أجزاء لا يمكن ترجمتها، لازم أقراها بالإنجليزي، وخصوصا الكلمة بتاعت ميجور جنرال سميدلي باتلر لازم أقراها بالإنجليزي. لازم، لأنها مهمة جدا جدا. أنا متفقة جدا مع إيفلين عقاد لما قالت لازم نربط بين الأكاديمية والنشاط. أنا طبيبة جراحة، كنت جراحة صدر. إيه اللي يخليني أدخل في السياسة والحرب والمرأة والرجل وما إلى ذلك. لكن إحنا لازم دلوقتي نفكر في المستقبل، لأن المستقبل مبني على الربط بين العلم والفن والأكاديميا، بين الأدب، بين السياسة، بين الجنس، بين الاقتصاد. لا يمكن أن نفصل بين الحرب الاقتصادية والحرب الجنسية. لا يمكن نفصل بين الحرب النفسية والحرب الدينية والطائفية. أنا كنت هنا في بيروت سنة 1980، كنت بشتغل في الأمم المتحدة وقدمت استقالتي. كنت في الويمن بروجرام في ايكونوميك كوميشن فور ويسترن ايشيا. فأنا وجدت أن المرأة لن تتحرر في الأمم المتحدة، وبالضبط الحرب لن تنتهي بمجلس الأمن أو بالأمم المتحدة ولا بمحكمة العدل الدولية. محكمة العدل الدولية لم تحاكم مجرم حرب واحد، جورج بوش الذي دخل إلى العراق في سنة 1991 تحت أكذوبة كبيرة اللي هي weapons of mass destruction، وطلع إن سبب الحرب وتدمير العراق كانت أكذوبة. ودخل جورج بوش ومعاه 30 جيش من أوروبا وأمريكا ودمروا العراق من أجل البترول. وبعدين محكمة العدل الدولية لم تحاكم جورج بوش أبدا، وإنما قتل صدام. زي الآن بشار الأسد، الآن كل الناس ضد بشار الأسد. طبعا هو دكتاتور، وصدام حسين كان دكتاتور، ومبارك كان دكتاتور، والسادات كان دكتاتور، وأوباما دكتاتور. جميع الحكام دكتاتوريين طبعا كلهم، والحكومات كلها بتعمل ضد شعوبها. لكن محكمة العدل الدولية لم تعاقب ولم تدين إلا الدكتاتور الصغير. دكتاتور ضعيف صغير، لكن دكتاتور كبير زي جورج بوش زي أوباما لا، دول بيطلعوا براءة. أنا عايزة أقول باختصار، لأني أنا أريد أسمعكم، مش عاوز أتكلم كتير. أنا هتكلم 20 دقيقة وأقرأ لكم أجزاء من البيبر. يعني إحنا بنعيش في غابة بصراحة. أنا جاي أقول لكم كده لأن أنا تعبت من المؤتمرات، وأنا مع إيفلين إن إحنا لازم نعمل حاجة. إحنا جايين هنا، جايين من بلادنا عشان نعمل حاجة، مش عشان نعمل مؤتمر ونتكلم ونروح، لا. وأنا في كل مؤتمر بعد المؤتمر أقول لهم نعمل نتورك، نعمل حاجة، يتجمعوا يتفركشوا، لأن محدش همه، محدش عايز يدفع ثمن الحرية. الحرب لن تنتهي إلا إذا دفعنا ثمن استغلال المرأة والقهر الجسدي والقهر الجنسي للمرأة والقهر السياسي والاقتصادي لن ينتهي إلا إذا النساء أصبحوا قوة سياسية ضاغطة. لازم قوة، ما هو في قوتين في العالم، يا قوة سياسية يا قوة عسكرية وبوليسية. إحنا النساء لا نمثل قوة عسكرية ولا بوليسية، إحنا قليل جدا، إحنا قليلين جدا في الجيش وفي البوليس. وطبعا الحرب ذكورية، الحرب طبقية ذكورية أبوية، إحنا النساء خارجها. فليس أمامنا غير القوة السياسية. كيف نتجمع على المستوى العالمي والمستوى الإقليمي والمستوى المحلي؟ هو ده المحك، وهو ده إحنا هنا دلوقتي كده نعمل إيه؟ يعني شوفوا إحنا في القاعة كام، 200 300. إحنا ممكن نغير العالم. بتحصل ثورة ب7 أشخاص، فإحنا ممكن نغير بلادنا، ممكن نغير الواقع بتاعنا، بتاع بلادنا العربية والعالم كله نقدر نغيره. المنطقة بتاعتنا بتغرق، وأنا لا أسميها منطقة الشرق الأوسط بكل أسف. دائما أقول أوسط بين مين ومين، يعني إيه؟ دائما أقول لك ميدل إيست. أنا أسمع كلمة ميدل إيست ويجي لي تشنج عصبي. ميدل تهو، إحنا ميدل لمين؟ إحنا سمينا ميدل إيست أيام ما كنا استعمار بريطاني، فسمى مصر والمنطقة بتاعتنا دي الميدل إيست الأوسط، والهند بقت اسمها الفار إيست. هند بقت الفار إيست، وإحنا الميدل إيست. دي لغة استعمارية، colonial language. فوي نيد تو دي كولونايز ذا لانجوج. جزء مهم قوي ان احنا ما نسميش نفسنا ميدل ايست او شرق اوسط ابدا ابدا. وانا دايما بعاند واقول النكته دي لما اروح لندن، اقول I'm going to the middle west. ولما اروح امريكا اقول I'm going to the far west. والناس تضحك، شوفوا انتوا بتضحكوا، لكن محدش بيضحك لما نقول ميدل ايست. ليه؟ لان احنا خدنا على الاستعمار slave psychology، والنساء عندهم slave psychology. النساء خدوا على القهر والخضوع. الزوجة بتبقى بتنضرب من زوجها أو زوجها بيخونها ويطلق ويتجوز 4. عندنا في مصر بيتجوز 4 ويخونها وقاعدة معاه. slave psychology، سيكولوجية العبيد، إن إحنا نردد ما يقوله الآخرون. إحنا لازم إحنا نحرر اللغة بتاعتنا، نحرر جسد المرأة وعقلها وشخصيتها، ونحرر بلادنا. ولا يمكن تتحرر النساء في بلاد خاضعة، لا يمكن تتحرر المرأة في بلاد مستعمرة، وإحنا بلادنا مستعمرة حتى اليوم، مصر ولبنان. ولا يمكن الاستعمار الأجنبي يدخل إلى بلد دون التعاون مع الحكومة المحلية. الحكومات المحلية في البلاد العربية هي التي تعاونت مع الاستعمار البريطاني والأمريكي والإسرائيلي وكل حاجة، بيتعاونوا معاهم. وإحنا الشعوب نموت نفسنا ولا هم هنا لغاية النهاردة، لغاية النهاردة. فإذا لا مجال للتحرر إلا بحاجتين: الوعي، رفع الحجاب عن العقل، لأن التعليم والإعلام والسياسة بتحجب عقولنا. إحنا عقولنا كلها محجبة، مش عارفين الظلم ده جاي منين. ليه بيحدث حرب عندنا؟ ليه بعد ثورة 2011 في مصر اللي هي ثورة تاريخية، ليه حصل لنا هذا إجهاض للثورات؟ ليه ما بنسألش نفسنا وما بنتجمعش؟ فما فيش وعي، ليس عندنا وعي بالظلم، بأسباب الظلم. يعني في ناس يقول لك إيه ده أسباب الظلم جاية مثلا من ربنا، أو ربنا هو اللي بيجيب الحرب، ربنا هو اللي بيجيب الرزق. مش عارفين إن هو النظام العالمي السياسي الاقتصادي الرأسمالي الطبقي الديني العنصري كلها بتلعب دور في قهر النساء والرجال والشباب والأطفال. ودلوقتي في حرب عالمية ثالثة ستحدث الناس مش عارفاها، اللي هي المهاجرين. أنا في كل بلد بروحها، وحضرت في السويد أظن مؤتمر عن مأساة المهاجرين. الشباب المهاجر في مصر دلوقتي بسبب زيادة الفقر والبطالة من ساعة ما البورصة دخلت مصر، البورصة ورجال الأعمال والرأسمالية والسوق الحرة، الفقر زاد، قهر النساء زاد، الشباب بيهاجر وبيغرق في البحر. يمكن كل يوم بتسمعوا عن شباب بيغرق. ما هي دي حرب. هي الحرب ليست عسكرية فقط، في حرب عسكرية وحرب نفسية واقتصادية وكل أنواع الحروب، لكن احنا بنفكر في الحرب العسكرية فقط. فالحرب أنواع، ودلوقتي حرب الفيروسات والحرب البيولوجية. تصوروا هذا العالم اللي هو غير إنساني. بدل ما الاكتشافات الطبية الجميلة اللي بتكتشف لما نكتشف الفيروسات الجديدة وكده، نقوم نستخدمها لقتل الأعداء. في حروب بيولوجية الآن بتستخدم، مش بس النووية، حروب بيولوجية باستخدام الفيروس. ليه هذا موجود في العالم؟ يقول لك الطبيعة البشرية. لا، مش الطبيعة البشرية، ليست الطبيعة البشرية، هو النظام الذي أساء إلى الطبيعة البشرية. ده يقول لك المرأة مسوشية، هي بتحب التعذيب، هي بتحب الضرب. لا، ما فيش حاجة اسمها طبيعة أنثوية وطبيعة ذكورية. هو حسب ما بنتربى، وبنتعلم. فإذا لابد أن نعي، يعني حتى نصور، حتى الثورة تنجح عايزة حاجتين: الوعي، رفع الحجاب عن العقل، والتنظيم. فازاي احنا في هذا المؤتمر نعمل تنظيم جديد لبلادنا، تنظيم جديد يقود التحرر العالمي والإقليمي والمحلي، لأن لا يمكن فصل العالمي عن المحلي أبداً. The global is local، وبيستخدموا كلمة واحدة global دلوقتي، global، مفيش فرق. فإحنا هنا لازم نحس بقيمتنا، أصل إحنا في بلادنا العربية، لأن إحنا مقهورين بحكومتنا. أنا حتى اليوم لا أتكلم في التلفزيون المصري لغاية النهاردة بعد الثورة لا أتكلم، ولست موجودة في أي منصب، ولا حد بيقول لي أنت فين خالص. وعادت الوجوه القديمة بتاعت سوزان مبارك ومبارك والسادات كلهم رجعوا تاني، وإحنا في البيوت يا إما مسجونين، شباب الثورة في السجن. فيعني تم إجهاض للثورة لأن الشعب عمل ثورة وروح بيته. وإحنا قوة الشعب بتيجي منين؟ كيف نواجه القوة العسكرية والبوليسية؟ بقوتنا إحنا، لكن إحنا متفرطين، كل واحد بيجري ورا مصلحته ويلم فلوس ويشوف ولاده ومش عارف إيه وخلاص. فلا بد أن يتغير هذا، ولا بد أن يتغير هنا والآن من المؤتمر ده. مش نقول هنغير لما نروح، لا، التغير هنا والآن، يبدأ من هنا والآن. تضامن المرأة العربية جمعية إحنا عملناها من أجل التضامن الإقليمي والعربي والمصري والعالمي. ضربت وأغلقت. ليه؟ لأنه وقفنا ضد حرب الخليج. قالوا لنا قضية المرأة مالها ومال الحرب. تصوروا فهمهم لقضية المرأة إن إحنا نتكلم بس في الختان. أنا مش ضد ده، لازم نتكلم على الختان، ولازم نتكلم على القهر الجنسي وكل حاجة، لكن يجب ألا نفصل الختان عن الحرب الاقتصادية والحرب العالمية. لكن يقولك أنتوا تضامن المرأة العربية. لما جم قفلونا، اتقفلنا سنة 1991 لما حرب الخليج قامت سنة 1991، وقلنا دي حرب بترول. وجورج بوش الأب، دايما أقول الأب والابن والروح القدس، يعني ده جورج بوش الأب دخل الحرب ورشى الحكومة المصرية مبارك 7 بليون دولار، وجي بلادنا يدفع رشاوي للحكام سنة 1991. وكان عار، يعني أنا كتبت وتعاقبت من حسني مبارك لأني كتبت إن مصر قبلت 7 بليون دولار لتدخل الحرب. الشباب المصري دخل حرب العراق وليس لنا فيها نفع. الأمريكان والأوروبيين عايزين بترول، فدخلوا بعض البلاد العربية بالرشاوي، دفعوا لليمن ودفعوا لمصر ودفعوا لبلاد كثيرة مش عايزة أقولها. لكن المهم إحنا لما وقفنا تضامن المرأة العربية ضد حرب الخليج سنة 1991، قالوا لنا أنتوا مالكم مال الحرب، النساء أنتوا اتكلموا في الحاجات الجنس والختان مالكوش دعوة بالحرب. قلنا لا، قضية المرأة قضية سياسية اجتماعية اقتصادية حربية، والمرأة بتبقى ضحية للحرب أكتر من الرجل، وإحنا لازم يبقى لنا موقف كنساء. نصف المجتمع في الحرب، مش إحنا نصف المجتمع، يبقى قضيتنا سياسية، مش قضية بس خاصة بالزواج أو الأسرة أو الجنس. لا، لازم نربط ده الجنس بالاقتصاد والسياسة، ولازم أيضا ندخل في موضوع الحرب. فقفلونا ضد القانون، وحتى اليوم لا نستطيع أن نسترد تضامن المرأة العربية مرة أخرى بعد الثورة، مش قادرين ناخدها تاني. فإذا إيه بقى هنا القوة؟ بقى هنا النقطة اللي أنا عايزها. نوال السعداوي كفرد يخلوها موجودة، يقولوا لها ده فرد ملهاش قيمة، نحبسها نقتلها، أنا مش عارفة إيه. حاجات زي كده. يمكن انتوا سمعتوا من كام يوم قالوا نوال السعداوي ماتت، يمكن سمعتوها في قناه. قالوا قلت كويس جدا الواحد يموت ويبقى لسه عايش يعني. ف ممكن القضاء على الفرد مهما كان، وانا ضد حكايه النجوميه، يقول لك ستار ومش عارف. هم يحبوا يعملوا ستارز، يعملوا ستارز نجوم ويغروهم بقى بالشهره والفلوس، وما فيش تنظيمات. لكن هو الشيء الوحيد اللي ممكن يمنع الحرب، وممكن يمنع قهر النساء، وممكن يمنع ظلم المهاجرين، وممكن يصلح العالم من غابة إلى مكان إنساني الواحد يعيش فيه، اللي هو إيه؟ الوعي والتنظيم. تنظيم سياسي، لازم يبقى لنا قوة سياسية. ومش معنى كده قوة نسائية للنساء بس، قوة سياسية للنساء، لا. احنا تضامن المرأة العربية كان 40% رجال، وفي رجال عقليتهم أكثر تطوراً من النساء. احنا مش بنقسم البشر حسب الأعضاء الجنسية أبداً، لا نقسم البشر حسب الأعضاء الجنسية، وإنما نقسم البشر حسب العقل. ولذلك الحرب موقف عقلي، كوني أنا امرأة ده موقف عقلي، الأنوثة موقف عقلي. يعني إيه أنوثة؟ يعني أنا أحط مكياج والبس كعب؟ هل هذه هي الأنوثة؟ الأنوثة موقف عقلي، الحرب موقف عقلي، الرجولة موقف عقلي. فالعقل هو الأساس، العقل هو الذي يفرق بين إنسان وإنسان، وليس الأعضاء الجنسية. عايزة أقول نقطة مهمة قبل ما أجي الخطبة بتاعت الميجور الأمريكي. الكلمة مهمة جدا، عايزة أقرأها لكم. بس عايزة أقول إيه؟ البورصة والمال هو الذي يحدد كل شيء. إحنا دلوقتي في مصر عملنا ثورتين: ثورة تخلصنا من الاستبداد السياسي نظام مبارك، وثورة يونيو تخلصنا من الإخوان المسلمين الاستبداد الديني، رغم أن الأمريكان الآن يؤيدون الإخوان. الأمريكان بيلعبوا لعبة خطيرة جدا، هم اللي جابوا داعش. القوى الأمريكية، مش بقصد الشعب الأمريكي، الشعب الأمريكي أنا بحبه جدا، ميريام كوك صاحبتي، وليا أصحاب في أمريكا بحبهم يحبوني على مستوى الشعب، لكن الحكومات كلها سيئة. فالحكومة الأمريكية مع بعض الحكومات في الاتحاد الأوروبي دول هم اللي خلقوا القاعدة وداعش والطالبان وبوكو حرام. ودايما أنا كنت بقول في كل الكلام لما كان بقول جورج بوش وبن لادن توأم، جورج بوش وبن لادن توأم. لازم نفهم إيه اللي بيحدث. إيه داعش دي داعش جت استولت على أرض في سوريا والعراق، أراضي كبيرة، وبتزحف جابوا سلاح منين؟ بيجيبوا فلوس منين؟ مين أيدهم؟ وبيستخدموا أرض أنواع الإسلام وأرض أنواع التفسيرات للإسلام، وأكبر عدو لهم المرأة، يحجبوا المرأة وينقبوا المرأة. إيه ده؟ ده في تخريب للمنطقة بواسطة الدين والإسلام والتيارات الإسلامية، وكل ده عشان البورصة. في مصر اليوم يمكن مشيرة صديقتي عارفة إن الحكومة المصرية في مصر بعد ثورتين تأجل أو تلغي الضريبة على البورصة. جميع البلاد بتاخد ضريبة من البورصة، من اللي بيربحوا مليارات. بتوع البورصة بيكسبوا بالمليارات، وكل دولة بتعمل ضريبة على البورصة تحطها في خزانة الدولة. تصوروا الحكومة المصرية تتنزل عن الضريبة دي واحنا فقراء؟ يعني ده الدول الغنية ما بتعملش كده، أمريكا ما بتعملش كده ولا أوروبا. فإذا دي حرب اقتصادية ضد الشعب. لما الفقر حرب، الفقر لما نفقر الملايين، ما هي دي حرب اقتصادية لقتل الميديا، الإعلام، قتل للعقل. كل ده قتل. القتل مش بس بالسلاح. فلازم نوسع لمفهوم الحرب، نوسع، نفهم الأرباح بتروح فين. انتوا عارفين أكتر أرباح بتيجي من بيع السلاح، تجارة السلاح وتجارة النساء، حاجتين. بيكسبوا. الرأسمالية والسوق الحرة تكسب. أكبر منبع تجارة السلاح وتجارة أجساد النساء والرقيق والجنس. شوف الترابط. ففي حاجات كتير قوي في المنطقة بتاعتنا. لا دولة تستطيع أن تملك السلاح النووي إلا إسرائيل. تصوروا في مصر نحن لا نستطيع في مصر أن نملك قوة نووية سلمية في الطب، وأنا طبيبة وعلى يدي بقى ده حصل. رفضوا تماما إن مصر يبقى عندها قوة نووية طبية، وإسرائيل عندها ترسانة نووية للحرب. ليه؟ طبعا الحرب تدخل، الحرب inevitable طبعا. ومن لا يحارب عن الإنسان اللي يتظلم ويسكت ده ما يبقاش إنسان. أنا كامرأة لا يمكن أقبل الاضطهاد. أنا طلقت 3 أزواج، 3 أزواج طلقتهم لأني لا أقبل الظلم، لا أقبل الظلم. لأن الإنسان هو إيه؟ كرامة، عدل، حرية، هو ده. فإزاي إن شعب يقبل الظلم ويقبل إن هو يمنع من البحوث النووية الطبية في الطب، في حين إن دولة مجاورة عندها ترسانة نووية ومحدش يكلمها؟ فيعني عاوزة أقول الموضوع كبير جدا، وإزاي المرأة في الحرب يعني بتبقى ضحية مش للعدو بس. أصل العدو في فراش المرأة، الرجل. يعني مشكلة المرأة كبيرة complicated قوي. يعني عدو المرأة في فراشها، زوجها، أبوها، أخوها، رجل الأسرة، والعدو. يعني هي بين حاجتين. فتبص تلاقي حتى في قوانين انتوا دارسين بقى، اللي درسوا الحروب وكتبوا عن الحروب، النساء في الحرب لما يجوا يغتصبوا، انتوا عارفين في الحرب لما الجنود بيدخلوا بيعتبروا ان النساء دول ملكهم يغتصبوهم. فالمرأة اللي بتغتصب بتلفظ في بعض البلاد، أهلها يا إما يقتلوها يا إما يطردوها، مش عايزينها، وإذا حملت تبقى مشكلة. فإذا المرأة في وضع سيء جدا سواء في الحرب أو في السلم. أنا بقى يعني الوقت، أنا عايزة بس في حاجات كتير قوي أنا بسيبها للنقاش، بس عايزة أقرأ لكم حتى عشان تبين قد إيه الحرب الاقتصادية مختفية تحت شعارات جميلة قوي. يعني مثلا شعار السلام، مش في اتفاقية سلام بين مصر وإسرائيل؟ السادات عمل اتفاقية للسلام كان كلها حرب وأنتجت حرب. يعني تحت اسم السلام بيحدث الحرب. أنا مسميها hidden economic wars، الحروب الاقتصادية المختفية. وطبعا الحرب الدينية ما بيقولوش دي حرب دينية، بيخبوها، لأن ربنا مش مفروض بيحارب. يعني مفروض ربنا العدل والحرية والسلام، مش كده ولا إيه؟ مفروض كده. ربنا مش مفروض يبقى عنيف، مش كده ولا أنا غلطانة؟ طب بيحرق الناس ليه بقى؟ ما هو أصل أنا عايزة أقول إيه، في حاجة في التعليم غلط، في التعليم الديني. لما الأطفال يتعلموا إن الإله بيحرق الناس اللي مش يؤمنوا بيه، طب ما هو ده عنف، ما هو ده بيمهد للحرب. فلازم نغير هنا في مصر دلوقتي بالتغيير، تجديد الخطاب الديني، لأن الأطفال بيتعلموا العنف من الطفولة بسبب التعليم الديني. لأنك تحرق، الأقباط يتحرقوا ليه؟ لأنهم كافرين. يعني إيه؟ لازم مفهوم الكفر ينتهي. مش مفروض يبقى فيه حد اسمه كافر وملحد ومؤمن، ده ينتهي خالص، لأن هذا التعليم الديني هو اللي بيرسب العنف في نفوس الأطفال من الطفولة. الهيدن ايكونوميك وورز، بقول ميجور جنرال سميدلي باتلر. انتوا عندكم نسخة من دي مش كده؟ هيوزعوا لكم نسخة. أيوة. ميجور جنرال سميدلي باتلر who died the most decorated U.S. Marine in American history. خد أكبر جايزة في البحرية الأمريكية. said قال في خطبة له said in a speech in 1933 quoted in Matt Kennard book The Racket. معرفش مين قرأ The Racket، كتاب مهم جدا اسمه The Racket، طلع السنة دي 2015. بيقول ايه بقى الميجور ده؟ بيقول I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service, and during that period I spent most of my time as a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. I helped make Mexico, and especially Tampico, safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. In China, in 1927, I helped see to it that Standard Oil went on its way unmolested. Looking back on it, I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was to operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents. Shukran, shukran.
So today I want to suggest to you that gender relations and women's mobilizations can be seen as part of the causality of the evolution and of the different ways that the Arab Spring has evolved in the different countries that were affected by the Arab Spring. So the Arab Spring was an exhilarating moment for participants as well as for many observers. Across the Arab world, women and men stood up and demanded political change and deeper and more extensive rights. Outcomes, however, have varied, with some countries undergoing democratic transitions, others descending into civil conflict, and yet others reverting to authoritarianism. Specifically, Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and Yemen experienced political revolutions and regime changes. Morocco's 20th February protest movement was quickly followed by promised reforms, constitutional amendments, and a referendum. Bahrain's Shia-led protest movement was suppressed with the cooperation of the Saudi military. And Syria, Libya, and Yemen descended into varying degrees of violent civil conflict. In 2011-2012, Egypt, Morocco, and Tunisia appeared to be undergoing a democratic transition, but by 2013, Egypt's process had stalled and then reverted to a military-led authoritarianism, even though the Tahrir Square protests in Egypt had raised expectations of significant socio-political transformation. At this writing, only Tunisia has exhibited a successful pathway to democratic consolidation with a high representation of women in parliament after the fall 2014 parliamentary elections. So my presentation today draws on a larger, just completed project wherein 4 explanatory factors are identified for the divergent outcomes, one of which pertains to gender relations and women's mobilizations. The other elements of the framework pertain to the state and institutions, to civil society, and to international influences, including the imperialist interventions. Today, I want to focus on one of those four explanatory variables, gender and women's mobilizations. And I want to focus on that particular measure to demonstrate how women's legal status and social positions prior to the Arab Spring helped to shape the course of the protests and the evolution of the protests and the different outcomes. I apply this measure to two sets of cases, Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, which saw nonviolent protests and relatively less repression on the part of the state. And the second set consists of Bahrain, Libya, Syria, and Yemen, where states responded to the protests, whether those protests were violent or nonviolent, with force and repression. So let me begin by explaining the variable. Excuse me. But first, I just want to point out that this is the way both my paper is organized and the presentation. So these are my cases that I'm studying. I now want to talk about why gender is important in explaining these kinds of processes. I will talk about, very briefly, about women's rights prior to the Arab Spring across these different cases. I will talk about the gender dynamics of the Arab Spring, and then look at gender and women's mobilizations after the Arab Spring. So why is gender important, and what do we mean? Yesterday we heard a little bit about definitions and applications of the concept of gender, and I accept those, of course, but what I want to do today is bring a little bit more precision, kind of a sociological precision, to show how we can actually measure gender relations and women's mobilizations. So this refers to women's legal status and social positions, women's visibility, influence, and presence in the public sphere and the public space, the presence or absence of pro-women policies and programs. In Muslim-majority countries, the nature of family law, whether it is patriarchal or liberal, is an important element of this measure. Measuring gender relations and women's mobilizations is salient, that is significant, in at least 3 ways. First, research has shown that patriarchy and gender inequality are positively associated with both civil conflict and interstate conflict. That is, the presence of patriarchal institutions, including large and well-funded militaries, increase the likelihood of violence, domestic violence as well as interstate violence. Conversely, we can expect less violent conflict when women have a strong presence in civil society and in political society. Second, research also has shown that women's independent organizing in civil society accounts for progressive social policies, including women-friendly policies. In turn, women's capacity to organize, mobilize, and to effect positive change for women's rights suggests that there have been important structural and cultural changes in that country. It also suggests, women's capacity to organize and to effect these changes, suggests that women may be more likely to join pro-democracy movements and to be able to influence and shape the direction of those movements. The third reason, as I have argued elsewhere, women may or may not need democracy in order to flourish, but democracy without women's participation and rights is either partial or male-biased, or in some cases, impossible to achieve. So My comparative research on women's movements, which I've been conducting since 1995, has led me to conclude that on the eve of the Arab Spring, women's social participation, their legal rights, and their capacity for collective action differed significantly across the region, and especially these 7 countries that I'm looking at, with more progress in Morocco and Tunisia than in the other countries. So let's just look very quickly at women's rights before the Arab Spring. A body of literature, of scholarship in Middle East women's studies has identified state feminism as a characteristic of the modernizing regimes in the region, which other scholars have explained was part of the authoritarian bargain between governed and government, between women and the governments. That is to say that the regimes, these modernizing regimes, these post-independence regimes, sought to involve women in state building, development, modernization, albeit within limits. Thus, most countries saw rises in female literacy and educational attainment, with employment as teachers, health workers, and civil service employees, along with the establishment of what the United Nations has called the Women's National Machinery, which were these women's policy agencies that were established in most of the countries in order partly to implement UN mandates and partly to recruit and mobilize a population of female citizens loyal to the regimes. Of the 7 countries that I'm looking at, Egypt under Nasser and Tunisia under Bourguiba were considered to be the quintessential state feminist regimes. But there was a difference, because Muslim family law was retained in Egypt, as it was in all the other countries considered here, with the result that women's participation and rights were more circumscribed in Egypt than was the case in Tunisia. In addition, women's mobilizations in the 1990s and into the new century evolved differently across all these countries. Whereas Morocco and Tunisia, along with Algeria, formed a vibrant transnational feminist network called the Collectif 95 Maghreb Égalité, none of the other countries saw the emergence of a similarly large and influential independent organization of women's rights and advocates. Excuse me. Of course, all of the countries had women's organizations. And elsewhere, I have written about these women's organizations. I have enumerated them, I have named them, and I have constructed a typology of the different types of organizations. And all of them, in all of the countries that we're looking at, developed under authoritarian conditions. I mean, the entire region was led by authoritarian regimes. However, across these authoritarian regimes, there was more or less room for maneuver for the women's organizations. And in particular, in the Maghreb, the women's organizations became especially prominent, with their anti-fundamentalist networks, with women's publishing houses, and with advocacy for family law reform, which, as we saw, succeeded in Morocco in 2003-2004. Now, the social and gender indicators pertaining to the legal status and social positions of women in these 7 country cases on the eve of the Arab Spring, so we're talking about 2010, 2011. The data show that Tunisia did best on almost all of the indicators. Now note that Bahrain was a much richer country than Tunisia. And yet Bahrain was far behind Tunisia in many ways. There was fairly strong involvement of women in the judiciary as judges as well as lawyers in Morocco and Tunisia compared with the other countries. Prominent women could be found in all 7 countries under consideration, but only Tunisia had a political party that was led by a woman, Maya Dribi of the Progressive Democratic Party. Morocco had a number of prominent women's rights advocates associated with the Collective and with the family law reform, such as Latifa Jababdi, Rabia Nasiri, Amina Lemdini, Farida Benani, and others. And there were also prominent women in the political parties in Morocco and in government. And these were very strongly pro-women's rights, women in government, such as Nusas Ali and Aisha Ben Arabi. In 2001, women politicians from Morocco's main parties, Istiqlal, Union Socialiste et Force Populaire, the leftist Parti du Progrès et du Socialisme, and the Mouvement Populaire, among other political parties, established a network of women working for the establishment of a women's quota system. And the quota was established in Morocco in 2002. These prominent women also worked with women in the women's movement, in the ADFM, l'Union d'Action Féminine, etc., to push for the family law reform, and they worked for 12 years to do this. In 2007, a new cabinet was formed in Morocco with 7 women in the cabinet. That was the highest female representation in the cabinet since independence. In Egypt, women had been granted the right to vote in 1956, but subsequently the main legal gain had occurred in 2000, when women won the right to a khula, divorce. The very first judge was appointed, as you can see, in 2003, one woman judge in Egypt. Just prior to the protests against Mubarak, a parliamentary quota was adopted, and initiatives to prohibit and combat female circumcision were implemented, and courts issued the first convictions against sexual harassment. So there were some legal gains just before the protests, immediately before the protests. In Bahrain, women were given the right to vote and permitted to run for office only in 2002, when the first municipal and legislative elections took place. Although, as I mentioned, Bahrain is a high-income country, global reports on women's participation and rights ranks Bahrain among the lowest in women's development indicators. The Bahraini government placed restrictions and even ordered the closure of women's shelters and similar initiatives, such as the Respect movement initiated by the Bahrain Human Rights Society, the National Coalition to Stop Violence Against Women, and the Migrant Workers Protection Society. What about Libya? Gaddafi's takeover in 1969 resulted in the promulgation of laws that granted women more personal status rights, made primary and secondary education compulsory for all, and provided working women with an array of legal rights, such as generous maternity leave. Following the 2009 election, women occupied 36 out of the 468 seats in the parliament. So there were some gains made in Libya. Still, women were seen as unequal on the basis of biological differences that dictated their roles in society. There were no independent women's rights organizations, and many of the legal rights that Gaddafi had initiated were either not implemented nor were they enforced. Post-independence Syria saw a surge in women's activism and mobilization after the country extended universal suffrage to women in 1949. Several women became prominent government spokespersons, such as Buthena Shaban, and women constituted about 12% of parliament prior to the outbreak of protests in 2011. Nevertheless, the country's personal status laws impeded women's rights and freedoms in the areas of marriage, divorce, and child custody, while the absence of legal protection for women against domestic violence enabled gender-based violence throughout the country. Syria's 2003 ratification of the UN's Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women came with a long list of country-specific reservations about the incompatibility with domestic and Sharia law that essentially obstructed the full implementation of the Women's Convention, of the UN Convention. Yemeni women, they have experienced social and institutional barriers rooted in culture, in patriarchal family arrangements, and a fundamentalist form of Islam. But it wasn't always so, because between 1967 and 1990, Yemen was divided into North and South. The South, I would remind you, was the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen, which was once known as the Cuba of the Middle East. And the North was far more conservative and, of course, very closely aligned with Saudi Arabia. In the 1978 elections in the South, women comprised 10% of those elected, 1978, in southern Yemen. They were 10% of those elected and appointed to positions within the Supreme Popular Council. The Yemen Socialist Party bolstered women's rights and branded itself custodian of women's rights. After unification, however, women's status declined with the permeation of Islamist politics, as well as underdevelopment and lingering tribalism. Article 3 of the new constitution declared Islamic Sharia to be the source of all legislation. And Article 31 stipulated that, quote, women are the sisters of men. They have rights and duties which are guaranteed and assigned by Sharia and stipulated by law, unquote. On the eve of the Arab Spring, as you can see on the table here, Yemen was the poorest country in the region, with high rates of illiteracy, maternal mortality, and infant and child mortality. Women endured domestic violence and discrimination, marginalization from the political process, and restrictions on personal freedoms and mobility. To conclude this section, there were tighter restrictions on women's civil society organizing in Yemen, in Egypt, and especially in Bahrain, Libya, Syria, and Yemen, than in Morocco and Tunisia, where independent feminist groups flourished, as well as cooperated transnationally. The World Economic Forum has an annual report called the Global Gender Gap Report, and the 2011 report placed Tunisia in terms of the world ranking at 108. Okay, that's not brilliant compared to other countries, but it was just below South Korea, which is a much more developed and richer country, and Tunisia was placed higher than any of the other Arab countries. What is more, very high military spending in Bahrain, Egypt, Syria, and Yemen in the decade prior to the Arab Spring protests not only misallocated resources that could have and should have been used for deeper and more extensive social development, and that's the data there, but in retrospect, it portended the role of militarism in the Arab Spring protests. Now, look at these numbers and these figures. It's really very interesting. Across the Arab region, there was always high spending on education, but not necessarily health, and very, very high military spending. Very high military spending in absolute terms and when compared with spending on health, especially in Egypt, Morocco, Syria, and Yemen. Only Tunisia and Bahrain, again, Bahrain has a much higher GDP per capita than Tunisia, have relatively high spending on health. Yemen's figures are especially problematical given that it is such a poor country, and look at its military spending compared with its spending on health. Now, I've looked at military spending over a 15-year period in the Middle East and North Africa, and that includes actually Iran. Very interesting. Over the period 2000 to 2010, military spending declined just a little bit, but remained very, very high. So Algeria, for example, 3.5% of GDP spending on military. Bahrain, 4%. Kuwait, 7%. The lowest was 3.6%. Lebanon, very high military spending in Lebanon. 5.4%. The lowest was 4.2% over that 10-year period. Jordan, 6.3% of GDP spending on military. Oman, 10%. Saudi Arabia, 10.6%. Syria, 5.5%. UAE, 9.4%. Most of these high military spenders are US allies, and they buy their weapons from the United States. Israel, 8% of GDP spending on military between 2000 and 2010. Iran's military expenditure, always much lower than its spending on education and health. And so is Libya's. And it's quite ironic because Libya was punished severely by the international community, even though it had discarded its nuclear weapons and its military spending was low. Probably that's why it was punished, because it stopped buying all those weapons from Europe and the United States. Now, just to compare military spending in the Arab region to, for example, other parts of the world, which are similar in terms of levels of development. So, Arab countries, the average over this period, 5.5% of GDP spent on military, okay? But much higher for these US allies, right? Saudi Arabia, UAE, Jordan, etc. But the average, 5.5. Latin America and the Caribbean, 1.4. US, 4.8. Of course, the US is a big militarist country. Oh, and by the way, lots of violence in the US, lots of wars that the US fights and initiates. Right, so this suggests two things. A, that most Arab countries spend comparatively too much on weapons, largely due to their bilateral relations with the USA and the European Union. And B, these figures also suggest the masculinist nature of the state and its propensity for violence. Okay. But look at the figure for Tunisia. Very low, right? Okay, so that's women's rights before the Arab Spring. Now, what were some of the gender dynamics during the Arab Spring? So on the eve of the Arab Spring, women's rights movements were at various stages of development. So according to my analysis over these years, women's rights movements were absent in Libya, Syria, and Yemen. They were weak and in abeyance in Egypt. They were active and semi-institutionalized in Tunisia and Morocco. That is, only in Morocco and Tunisia were feminist organizations visible and vocal in the public sphere, with the capacity to enter into coalitions with segments of the political elite as well as other civil society partners, such as trade unions, human rights organizations, and progressive professional associations, in order to effect legal and policy reforms. So we know, I don't want to tell the whole narrative of the Arab Spring. You all know exactly what happened in December 2010 in Egypt, in Tunisia, and in January in Egypt and elsewhere, in February in Morocco. But one key difference, one of the characteristics, of course, of the protests throughout these countries was the very large participation of women. And this was unprecedented. Women have always taken part in protests and in movements throughout the history of the modern Middle East, but never in such large numbers. Of course, because the characteristics of the female population had changed, with educational attainment, with employment, with international travel and connections, and so on. So we saw this massive participation of women in the protests. But across the countries, the kind of participation that we saw and the way the women were treated in those protests were very different. So in Egypt, we discovered that there were terrible cases of sexual abuse of women protesters, which did not take place in Tunisia or Morocco. Another difference between actually Morocco and some of the other countries is that Morocco's democratic transition had already begun. And it began in 1998 with that new progressive government of Abdelrahman Youssefi and so on. So Morocco has had a somewhat different kind of so-called Arab Spring, and its democratic transition started earlier and more gradually, rather than quite dramatically in 2011. Nonetheless, it had this 20th February movement in February of 2011, where the king was forced to respond to the protests. But the situation was very different in the other countries. In Bahrain, the Shia majority was encouraged by the events in North Africa to gather in the Pearl Roundabout and protest their second-class citizenship and the legal discrimination that they endured. Women's rights were not part of the set of demands, and the protest movement was, in any event, quickly suppressed, as I mentioned, with the cooperation of the Saudi military, and there were even mercenaries from Pakistan who came into Bahrain. In Libya, the revolt began with women demanding to know the whereabouts of imprisoned male kin in the eastern city of Benghazi. But violence soon became the method of choice of both the regime and the protesters, who, in any event, were overwhelmingly male. The violence escalated when the UN established a free-fly zone and NATO intervened on the side of the rebels. Ghazoufi's ghastly death at the hands of his captors portended more violence, along with a more patriarchal turn. In Syria, as in Bahrain, the regime moved quickly to suppress the initially peaceful protests, but unlike Bahrain, the Syrian regime, unlike Bahrain, external intervention quickly sided with the rebels, right? So you have these two different cases, Bahrain and Syria. In Bahrain, international intervention was on the side of the regime. In Syria, international intervention was on the side of the rebels. So there are these inconsistencies in terms of the international influences. Unlike Libya, however, the Syrian regime has stayed in place, despite a brutal civil conflict in which regional and international powers take opposite sides. Yemen's protesters, again overwhelmingly male, resorted to violence to dislodge President Ali Abdullah Saleh and he fled to Saudi Arabia for safety. So, to conclude this segment, state repression was especially fierce where gender relations and women's mobilizations were weakest: Bahrain, Libya, Syria, and Yemen, and also where the military spending was highest. 3 of those countries have descended into civil conflict and failing states, although, as I have emphasized, external intervention, in particular imperialist and sub-imperialist, and by sub-imperialist I mean those regional powers that are allied with the US, England, France, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, etc. That also made a difference in terms of the different outcomes. So finally, after the Arab Spring, we know that the immediate outcome of the Arab Spring protests for women's rights was more favorable in Morocco and Tunisia than in Egypt, not to mention the other 4 countries. In Morocco, the female share of total seats in parliament rose to 17%, up from 11%, because of the continued deployment of political party quotas. The UN Convention reservations were removed, and steps have been taken to try to harmonize domestic laws with these international standards. The women's rights organizations in Morocco continue their advocacy for greater reproductive rights and to end violence against women. And for the first time, a woman, Nabila Munib, an outspoken left-wing activist and a feminist who had been involved in the 20th February movement. She was elected head of a major political party, the United Socialist Party, in 2012. Tunisia, women in 2011 were present in those 4 hautes commissions, those high commissions, which were established to run the country during the transitional period. It is a measure of the aspirations and expectations and the progress that has been made in Tunisia, that the women at the time complained that they didn't have a big enough presence. But they had a presence in all of those haute commissions, 20%, 30%, which isn't bad. The transitional government declared a parité law and removed the reservations to the UN's Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And when the elections for the Constituent Assembly came around, 28% of the seats in the Constituent Assembly were occupied by women. We know that Ennahda formed a coalition government, but the feminist organizations were highly mobilized and very vocal and active in their opposition to Ennahda. But again, in coalition with other civil society and political society partners. For example, the Femmes Démocrates and the feminists in Aftourde, they organized marches in 2011 and 2012 for liberty, dignity, equality. And we all know that during those debates in the Constituent Assembly around the question of Sharia, whether there would be Sharia in the Constitution, and also whether or not the language in the Constitution would change from men and women's equality to men and women's complementarity, the feminists and the secularists won that particular debate. And in the October 2014 elections in Tunisia, women won 31% of the parliamentary seats. In contrast, so this is a table which my good friend Khadija Arfawi here had a look at one point, and she gave me a few extra names that I didn't have. So I put this together a while ago just to show the kind of evolution of the political system, of the kind of democracy that is being built in Tunisia with this political pluralism and the participation of numerous political parties, which include, by the way, left-wing parties, which is something that we haven't seen very much in other countries, although we do see them in Morocco as well. And I've also listed the ideology of the different political parties, the total number of seats that they had in that National Constituent Assembly, and the number of women. I couldn't get exact numbers for each of the political parties, but Ennahda had the most number of women. But you see, you have these progressive parties too, Etekatol, and you know, AFEC, if you consider that progressive, the Front Populaire, which, you know, and also the Workers' Communist Party, and El-Massad, which was part of this Pôle Démocratique Moderniste, etc. I mean, a very vibrant political pluralism that was developing in Tunisia, also with the assistance of these strong women's organizations and individual citizens. Very different situation in the other countries. In Egypt, because Egyptian women's gains had been recent and fragile, they became the victim of an Islamist backlash after the first democratic elections in the fall of 2011. Of the nine women MPs in Egypt's nearly 500-person parliament, it's a 2% female share. One was from the Salafist Noor party, and she wanted to undo that Khula law. So I have a set of hypotheses here. Why not Egypt? Why Tunisia? Why has Tunisia done so much better? But why didn't Egypt do? Because, as I said at the beginning of my talk, everyone expected Egypt to be doing, everyone except me, many people expected Egypt to do very, very well. But again, if you had been following the situation in Egypt, if you had been looking very, very carefully at the women's movement, if you had been looking carefully at the military, if you had been looking very carefully at the social and gender indicators, you would have realized that Egypt would not have done as well as Tunisia, actually. So why not Egypt? All the surveys and polls show that Egypt is among the most conservative countries in the Arab region. Lebanon actually tends to be, according to these surveys, and I mentioned this yesterday to, when I was speaking afterwards to Tracy Shamoun. Evelyne, you might be interested in this as well. In these international surveys and polls, World Values Survey, Pew, and others, Lebanon, along with Turkey and Tunisia, tend to have the most liberal and moderate and tolerant attitudes. Tolerance also regarding, for example, non-Muslims. But Jordan and Egypt are very, very conservative, according to these polls, in terms of their attitudes. So, there's low support for gender equality and women's rights, low support for marriage in which both husband and wife have jobs. The respondents are split in Egypt on whether a woman should have the right to choose to veil and whether university education is equally important to boys and to girls. And Egypt has the highest support, even higher than Pakistan, when these Muslim majority countries are compared. Egyptians have the highest support for the military. So what happened in 2013 isn't that much of a surprise, yeah? Bahrain, Zainab al-Khawaja, a leading human rights campaigner, was detained on numerous charges, including insulting the king. And in October of this past year, women's rights defender Ghada Jamshid, I think some of us know her from previous years and conferences and so on, she appeared before the third lower criminal court on charges of defamation via Twitter. Jamshid has long been the head of the Women's Petition Committee, which is a network of Bahraini women human rights defenders who campaign for the codification of Bahrain's family laws and their reform. And in January of this year, about 72 Bahrainis, Sunni and Shia, were stripped of their citizenship for harming the interests of the kingdom. Libya. So since the violent overthrow of the Gaddafi regime, Libyan women's status has deteriorated as the country endures near state collapse and increasing threats from Islamist and conservative groups in society, seeking to establish strict Islamic codes of conduct, including gender segregation in public spaces. The growing security vacuum has drastically affected the mobility and visibility of women and girls. And according to one survey that was conducted in 2011, 57% of women interviewed felt completely restricted in their movement, and families feared for their safety in the absence of an institutionalized and functioning security sector. I mean, it was interesting that one of the first pronouncements of the head of the National Transitional Council in 2011 was that Libya would revert to Sharia law and that polygamy would be reinstated. Now, this at a time when chaos and armed militia and violence were spreading throughout the country, but the head of the National Transitional Council decides to make a statement not on the security and violence situation, but on polygamy. The international backers of Libya forced him to revoke those statements and the moves, but afterwards they were reinstated. Since 2011, in Syria, women's roles in the armed uprising includes the creation of activist networks such as Syrian Women for the Syrian Revolt. Over the past 4 years, however, the women's rights agenda has been suppressed by the rise of radical Islamist groups, and women have been consistently marginalized by the Syrian opposition. And we have heard a great deal about Syria yesterday, so I won't add anything to that except to say that there is no evidence that women's roles in the Syrian opposition is any better than women's roles in the Syrian government. But if anybody has more data on that, then please correct me. In Yemen, also, although activist journalist Tawakkol Karman was bestowed a Nobel Peace Prize in 2011 for human rights activism, which she shared with 2 women from Liberia, there is, again, no evidence of prominent roles for women in Yemeni society. And in any event, as we know, with the deterioration of the security situation in Yemen, Saleh was pro-US, people didn't like him. His successor was pro-US, the Houthi rebels didn't like him. Now there is a rebellion in Yemen. Saudi Arabia has attacked Yemen. No one is criticizing Saudi Arabia for attacking Yemen. The situation deteriorates. So finally, why the setbacks then in Bahrain, Libya, Syria, and Yemen? And here I have summarized the reasons. So compared to Morocco and Tunisia in particular, pre-existing relations were patriarchal and women's organizations and mobilizations were weak in those countries. Civil society in those countries was less robust and less well organized. The state institutions were more authoritarian, patriarchal, and militaristic. And of course, there was the international interference. The repression in Bahrain with the aid of the GCC and Saudi forces and the consent of the Western powers. the NATO attacks on Libya, the growth of the militia and state failure, and of course, the internationalized civil conflict in Syria and Yemen. So on the eve of to conclude, on the eve of the Arab Spring protests, Moroccan and Tunisian women were active in both civil society and political society, and women's rights were semi-institutionalized in those two countries. This had a positive effect on the gender dynamics of the Arab Spring protests in those two countries as compared with those countries and Egypt. And it also had an effect on the gendered political outcomes. Therefore, gender relations, the legal status of female citizens, and mobilizations before the Arab Spring helped to shape the nature of the uprisings in each of our 7 cases and constitute a compelling explanatory factor for the divergent outcomes of the Arab Spring. Thank you for your attention.